All right, welcome to this presentation from Healthmark Academy, Empowering the Heart of the Hospital. And if you're watching this live as part of our 7 days of CE presentations, that means it's SPD week. So you are the heart of the hospital, and I want to say a very special thank you to you. And I want to say happy SPD week because you don't hear thank you enough for the jobs that you're doing. And it's such an honor to be able to present to you and to show you kind of some things that I've learned throughout my career that hopefully will help you. So as we dig in, I'm Michael Matthews. I'll be your educator for this presentation. I'm from SPD, and in fact, a lot of what I'm going to share with you today, I learned as I was a manager and from a lot of mistakes that were made while I was a manager. I can tell you that I really wish someone had set me down and explained to me a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today because as I will get into my first kind of foray into what we're about to talk about did not go well. So we'll dig in here in a second. So today we are going to be talking about navigating the value analysis committee. And like I said, alluded to before, I remember making my first proposal that went to the value analysis committee. I had no idea what it was. I was just told there's this committee that looks at things, and you make a recommendation or a proposal to them, and they say yes or no. And I had no idea that you had to create like justifications, and they were going to push back and all that sort of stuff. And so when they asked me what my reasoning for wanting a particular thing was, my reasoning to them was, well, you made me the manager, and I think that's what we need. And obviously, it did not go well. So, yeah, I had no idea how to be prepared for any of these things. And so that's what I'm hoping to share with you today is information that's going to help you prepare in order to be successful when you need to purchase things. Now, I do want to say that obviously, I'm using the term value analysis committee, but in your particular hospital, it may be named something slightly different. And so we'll kind of get into that here in just a little bit. But if you say value analysis committee and somebody says, well, we don't have that, we have a VAT team, a value analysis team, or something of that nature. Don't freak out. It's basically the exact same thing. There's just some nuances to how each hospital works. And we'll get into all that. All right, so today's objectives are we're going to understand the structure and function of hospital value analysis committees. We're going to define the role of sterile processing in value analysis committees. We're going to learn how to prepare effective proposals, and we're going to build skills in value-based communication and cross-functional collaboration. All right. What is a value analysis committee? Well, essentially, we're answering the question of how does a hospital decide what to buy and consequently what not to buy. It's very important because hospitals typically can't buy everything that they would like to, right? They have limited resources. And even though we're all on the same side for patient care, the reality is that there is significant competition for those limited resources. And yes, it's kind of like being in gladiatorial games where departments are almost kind of pitted against one another to determine where should the hospital spend its money. And so I want you to understand this when you're coming into this, that it's very critical for you to understand that you're going into an arena with competition. And so you need to be prepared for competition. It's just like any sport that exists. Typically, the team that is better prepared tends to win. And I want you to be prepared so that you can effectively argue for the things that you need. Now, it's usually a multidisciplinary team that reviews product requests. And we'll get into who the specific members of that committee are, but generally it's made up of people from other departments. Now, their focus is going to be on safety, efficacy, compliance, and cost effectiveness. In other words, when they're looking to make a purchase, they're going to ask how this purchase improves something in these categories. And generally, it's the cost effectiveness one that becomes the main focus in a lot of cases. After my disastrous VAC committee, experiences, I actually ended up on the VAC team doing some of these analyses, and I'll say that a lot of what we looked at were sometimes looking at things that were, comparable services or comparable products, but at a lesser cost. It's kind of the same way of thinking, like if a drug, you've been buying the name brand of the drug, and then you find out that you can get the generic version of it. It's the same drug, it does the exact same things, it's the exact same formula, but it just doesn't have the name brand attached to it, so it's significantly less. Like that's something a VAT committee would definitely want to look at, because they can get the same product but at a lower cost, and so they save the hospital money. And a lot of times, most of these VAC committees are given a number at the beginning of the year that they're supposed to save the hospital. And I remember my first year, that number was $1 million. Like we had received instructions from our CFO that said, your job is to go through everything that we purchase and save our hospital $1 million. And so a lot of times, and that's probably a very small number compared to some VAC committees that are operating throughout the country. You may be a part of a hospital that's multiple millions that they're trying to save, and so they're looking at all of these things that the hospital does in order to try and save money. Now, again, like I said, it's a multidisciplinary team, so it's often going to include representatives from nursing, the operating room, supply chain. In fact, normally the person who's kind of the head of the VAT committee is usually from supply chain. It's usually the head of supply chain or somebody very high up that chain. They often include things like biomed, finance, infection prevention. Usually there's at least one physician representative. Sometimes people from pharmacy, because they look at a lot of different, equivalent drugs that they try to provide. And a lot of times there's a core team of certain members, and then they ad hoc will add on different members depending upon what they're looking at. And so if they're looking at something in EVS, they might bring in the head of EVS for that committee evaluation, or but they may not ask the physician to come on that one because it doesn't affect anything in the physician's practice, for example. So sometimes the parts are interchangeable, but the main point is that it's typically a group of people from various backgrounds who are all trying to kind of give their position and their view on why a hospital should or should not invest into a particular product or a particular thing. Now, how does the whole process work? And I put work in parentheses there because I know that there are people out there who have probably been burned in this process, and they're going to say, "Ha, I'll tell you, it doesn't work." It does work, actually. It's just the problem is most of the time we're not given a roadmap for how to navigate it, and so we don't know how to make it work for us. And so a lot of times we're like the Bobs on the screen. We say, what exactly is it that you do here? And that's how we feel about the VAT committee. Like, just arbitrarily say yes to some things and no to other things, and we're kind of left there just saying, well, how am I supposed to get what I need through? Well, remember, each hospital is going to have some nuances. So I'm going to give you kind of like a high level general overview. But the reality is that your specific hospital is going to have some differences to it. Those of us who are in and out of a lot of different hospitals, we have a saying, if you've been to one hospital, that means you've been to one hospital. It means that every single hospital you go into is completely different. And so what I'm going to challenge you on this is to get to know your hospital's process, because it is going to be a little bit different just depending upon what its function is and what its goals are. Now, one thing that will oftentimes be differentiated on the VAC team is the difference between capital costs and operational costs. And in some hospitals, these are two separate committees that are looking at two different things. In some hospitals, you may not have a value analysis team. You may have a capital cost team. And so again, it just depends on the structure of your hospital. But this is a difference that I want you to really understand, is what is the difference between a capital cost and an operational cost. A capital cost is something that you purchase one time. And an operational cost is something that's an ongoing expense that has to be figured into your annual budget. And oftentimes hospitals will distinguish between a capital cost and an operational cost by a threshold, meaning a certain amount of money that separates something from being operational and being capital. And again, what that number is for your hospital is going to be different. Like I said, when I was a manager many, many years ago, we were at a small, suburban hospital, and our capital threshold was only $5,000. So that means a lot went through that capital purchasing piece. Now, again, that's been several years ago, and I'm sure at that same hospital it's probably higher at this point. But if there were other expenses that a facility wanted to make that were below that number, it could be figured into their operational costs. And again, kind of an easy way to distinguish between capital and operational and from an SPD mindset is your automated washer is a capital cost, right? You buy the washer one time. It's very expensive, but it's not like you have to pay for it every time you run it, right? You buy it once and then it's there and it goes. But you need certain things to make it go. And among those things are things like detergents, and you're going to buy detergents every month or every time you run low. Like it's an ongoing thing that you have to have in order to run that washer. So the washer is capital, the detergents are operational. Now, again, this is kind of a clue for us to understand that a lot of people have figured out that if you want to purchase something that is kind of almost at that borderline, maybe it's a little above the capital purchasing, but it's not like hugely expensive. If you can work with your vendor to get them to split up your payments, you can actually get that cost below the capital threshold and figure it into your operational budget. So you can avoid the whole capital cost process just altogether. Sometimes you can do that. So sometimes you can be creative once you understand the distinctions and you understand the rules that go along with this. Now, generally, though, there's going to be a request submission. And sometimes this is at a particular time of year. So going back to my experience again, this was in August. Every year in the month of August, everybody who wanted to purchase something that was going to be considered for capital purchasing had to be submitted in August. And that's because they would make the decision in November, they would set the budget in December, and in January they would say, okay, go, because that's the beginning of the fiscal year. Now, at different hospitals, you may not have a January through December fiscal year. Sometimes hospitals will do that in the middle of the year just to kind of split things up. Sometimes it's just a constantly ongoing thing, and there's not a quote unquote season. And again, so it depends on what your hospital's process is, but there's always going to be some type of request submission. And so you need to know what that submission process looks like, and you need to know the information that's required for that submission, because if you don't fill the form out correctly, you're probably going to be disqualified from the beginning. Now, there are going to be those specific deadlines, those specific processes, and again, you got to know what those are in order to get things in at the right time. Now, this means that you probably have to be proactive in anticipating what it is you want and making your case to get that purchase. Now, a lot of the rest of the presentation is going to be about what does making your case look like. And so you don't typically want to do this 1 week before the submission is required. If you do that, it's going to seriously hamper your efforts to get something purchased, because you got to make a good proposal in order for it to be successful. So you want to start this a good chunk of time before the proposals are due, so that you have plenty of time to get all the necessary information. Now, you want to review some key things, and among those things are the input from the key stakeholders. And so that's going to be people like the OR. If you're looking to make a purchase that's going to affect your throughput, the OR is going to want to know about it. If it's going to change their process, if they're going to have to change the containers that things are in, or to change the wrap, or change the process of moving things into decontam, whatever it is, if it affects them, and a lot of stuff we do will have a direct impact on them, they need to know about it, and they need to be able to give their input. And that's going to be an important detail for some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about here in just a little bit. Sometimes there's a product evaluation or a pilot that's going to be necessary too. And sometimes you can do this before you make the official proposal. Sometimes you do this after you make the proposal. Again, it's going to depend on the hospital, but generally if it's a product that you're evaluating, you're going to want to have some sort of a trial run to see if something works. And again, you can think about changing maybe the point of use treatment chemical that you're using. You don't typically want to just switch that without any input from the OR and without at least letting them try it and see what their input is. If their input is, we hate this stuff, chances are you're not going to get that pushed through. And if you do get it pushed through, it's going to be a nightmare on the back end. You need to know about that stuff on the front end. And by the way, if they really like it, having their voice of approval is going to help you make that case and get it approved. Now, oftentimes there is going to be a time of committee discussion, meaning at some point that committee is going to discuss your proposal amongst themselves. And keep in mind, most of them have no experience with sterile processing whatsoever. And so if your whole argument is, like mine was, well, I'm the manager and I just think we need it, well, the problem is that carries very little weight while they're having these internal discussions. Now, sometimes they might invite you in to come in and make that proposal to them. But again, they're going to push back and they're going to ask questions, and they expect you to have objective answers. Now, I've already kind of alluded to this, but I will share a story that at my hospital, where I was, first a manager and first tried to push this through a committee, SPD did not have a voice at the table when it came to devices that were being purchased, which makes me feel like Jacoby Magatu here, where he says, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here, right? Like, doesn't it seem really obvious that the people who are responsible for reprocessing stuff should have a say in what actually gets purchased that's going to need to be reprocessed? But in an awful lot of hospitals, that is not the case. And so one instance, we had one day we came in and there was just an extra flexible scope just given to us. And it was a difficult intubation scope. And we all looked at this scope. It had no barcode. We had no idea where it came from. It just showed up. And at our hospital, it was actually anesthesia that owned the difficult intubation scopes. And so I went to our head of anesthesia and I said, what's this scope? We've never seen this before. Where did it come from? And the head of anesthesia said, oh, yeah, we got that approved through our capital purchasing. And so we bought it and now here it is. And I said, wow, okay, well, we had no idea and I don't have the IFUs for it and I don't have any information about it. So I got to look at this thing. And I started digging into it and realized that this scope could not be sterilized except with ethylene oxide, which we don't have ethylene oxide at our hospital. And so I go back to our anesthesiologist and I say, well, I've got bad news. That scope that you bought can't be reprocessed by us. And it says the only way it can be sterilized is with ethylene oxide. And the anesthesiologist looked at me and he said, well, I don't understand the problem. Can't you just buy a can of ethylene oxide and like spray it on the scope? And I was like, no, that's not how this works. And so that's always been like one of my funny stories about how everybody in a hospital has like their own compartment of knowledge. And everybody knows their little compartment really well, but what we don't know typically is all the other things that go around that department of knowledge, right? And so again, it's kind of like, shouldn't you have asked us before you spent the money on this scope? And so again, this is exactly what I'm talking about, where we should be asked, we should be able to give our input on whether or not the equipment is even compatible with the processes that we have in place. And again, sometimes it's feasibility too. So for example, purchasing a Da Vinci robot, those have very extended reprocessing instructions. And so sometimes the things that it instructs you to do are just simply not feasible with the processes that you have in place currently. And so you need to be there to say, hey, if we're going to buy this, this is X amount of more work on my people. We can do it, but we're going to need more FTEs. And so you can at least advocate for that. It goes into the workflow, efficiency, and productivity. If you're getting new equipment in, which your hospital is almost always getting new equipment in, especially in the OR, how that affects your workflow and your ability to be productive has a direct correlation on the supplies that the OR has to do their job. And so consequently, you have to be there to make those arguments and bring those things to the attention of the committee. And of course, a big piece too is obviously patient safety and compliance. where if something just simply isn't safe for patients, or you don't have the right tools to be able to clean a certain piece of equipment, you have to be able to be there and say, we cannot be compliant with current expectations or the IFU if you put this product into our department. And sometimes it's as simple as just being like, we need a new brush. All right, we can get you the brush, right? Like, but you need to be there at the forefront having those conversations on the front end. Now, when we come to talking about a lot of these issues, we need to understand that the value analysis team is speaking a different language than what we speak. They are speaking the language of value. And they're using a lot of business terms, and we need to be conversant with those terms if we're going to make an important case, right? And just sometimes using the language that we use in sterile processing, where we're very focused on things like processes, and we're very focused on things like IFUs and mitigating risk of that nature, right? Like sometimes those things don't resonate in the same way that they would if you were talking to an OR person or a sterile processing person. And so you have to understand certain key terms. The first term I want you to understand is what we call total cost of ownership. So total cost of ownership means how much does this device actually cost me over its lifespan. And so if you want to think about going back to, say, for example, the washer, the automated washer I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Now that automated washer, let's just say it costs $50,000, okay? Chances are that $50,000 is not the only amount of money you're going to spend on that washer. There's a lot of other things that are necessary in order to make it work properly. So you might have to include something like a service contract, because guess what? It's a machine and machines break. And if the machine breaks, it's got to be repaired, right? And sometimes those things include things like regular ongoing maintenance. And so when you think about total cost of ownership, you're looking at not just the initial purchase price, but what is the full price of that piece of equipment over its lifespan. And so this becomes really important because sometimes you might find a device that has a very low cost of entry, and people will say, ooh, let's get that one. But what they don't tell you is that because it requires so much more maintenance, it breaks more frequently. And the maintenance costs are a lot higher for that piece of equipment, right? And so that means, yes, the initial purchase price is lower, but the total cost of ownership is significantly higher. And so again, these things come into play. And so being able to teach your hospital analysis committee about what the total cost of ownership of a particular device that you're proposing is going to be very, very important. In fact, they may ask you about total cost of ownership of a particular device. You need to be prepared to answer that. Another key term is what we call ROI, or return on investment. Now, most hospitals like the idea that if they're going to spend money on something, that thing is going to return money back to them, meaning they're going to be able to earn money on that. And they're typically willing to spend big money on things if that thing can demonstrate a return on investment, meaning at some point, I'm going to make more money than what this cost me. And so you think about like a Da Vinci robot, for example. Those robots are extremely expensive, but every hospital is willing to buy it. Why? Well, because they understand that there is a return on investment. They're going to make more money on what that robot does than what they're going to spend on that robot. We also need to talk about workflow throughput, which basically means how much is your hospital able to produce and in what time. And so if you're changing the process in order to make room for a new product, let's say maybe it's a microscope or maybe it's a borescope, you want to be able to communicate what that's going to do to your throughput of your workflow, meaning your total productivity. Also think about things like cost and risk avoidance. And again, this is kind of like thinking about your borescope, for example. If you're going to purchase a borescope, you need to be able to advocate that one of the reasons you want to purchase that borescope is because damage can lead to danger for the patients, maybe through infection or maybe through physical harm. But the point is that if you have the ability to see, you're going to mitigate and avoid that risk. Now, this is an important distinction because pretty much everything we do in sterile processing, we could say, well, this will help protect patients. And so we call that a soft cost, meaning we don't really have the amount quantified, and I can't tell you how much you're spending on any particular event, but it's more like it's theoretical, right? Because we don't know how many infections we've actually prevented because we prevented them. And so we don't really have a number that we can say this is going to save us X number of dollars if we implement this product. Now, the difference is a hard cost means we have quantified what we're actually spending on this problem. And so you might even think about something like damage to your scopes. That a repair cost is a hard cost. We know what that is for our hospital, right? Whereas infection costs, sometimes that's a little bit more of a soft cost because sometimes those infections don't get tracked very well. And so again, this might even be a good time for you to partner with your hospital infection preventionist to help quantify some of those things. We also want to talk about regulatory compliance. And this one comes pretty easily to us a lot of times in sterile processing, where we want to emphasize that purchasing a particular item will allow us to be more compliant with standards. And that's really important when you're moving into things like an audit time, like you're about to be inspected by the Joint Commission. That if you're able to say we are out of compliance, but if we purchase this, we will be in compliance. That's a way of advocating in a way that resonates with those hospital analysis committees. So let's talk about how to craft an effective proposal. Because essentially what crafting an effective proposal means is that you become the salesperson. So even though, yes, you probably have like a vendor or somebody kind of convince you that you needed this thing, whatever it is, ultimately the person who's proposing that idea to your internal hospital committee is you. It's not the salesperson. And so you, in a sense, have to become the salesperson in order to craft that effective proposal. So the first thing you want to do is you need to define the problem. In other words, if we're talking about trying to mitigate some repairs, for example, we need to be able to say, hey, we spent X number of dollars on repairs and we think we can get that number down. Or it might be something, again, going back to a borescope, you say, we have no current way of visualizing internal channels and that's a risk to patients. Right? And there's a lot of different things that you can think about. You could even put numbers for your automated washers and be like, hey, we've got a washer that's down 50% of the time. And so that hampers our productivity by 20% or something of that nature. But you're going to kind of put that into a succinct one-ish sentence that just clearly says, here's why I need this because it's going to fix this problem. Then you're going to describe what the solution is. And so this might be, we need 2 new washers. And describe why you think you need that. And again, you want to be very succinct here. And one thing your committee will almost 1,000% ask for is competitive bids, meaning they want to know that you talked to more than just one vendor. You weren't just convinced by like one really savvy sales guy and you took his proposal and you said, okay, we just need this one thing and we haven't talked to anybody else about this. Like most of the time, they're going to want to see that you have looked at least one other bid than the one that you are submitting. And when you make that recommendation, you can be almost put money on it, guaranteed that whichever one of the competitive bids is less is the one that they're going to be inclined to go for. Because remember, we're working from limited resources. And so the more bang that they can get out of their budget, that's what they're going to do. And so if you give them just a list of bids and the assumption is every single one of these bids is the exact same product, it's just a different company, they're always going to go with what the lowest number is. And so if you're going to advocate spending a higher number on a different vendor, you need to be very well prepared to explain why you want to go with that higher cost. And there's a lot of different reasons that you might go with a higher cost, many of which are very, very good reasons. In fact, I would say most of the time, again, going with the lowest bidder is not typically a good idea. But you have to be able to advocate that to people who are not familiar with those companies and not familiar with those products. You also want to try and include a cost and risk analysis, meaning this is what it's going to cost, and this is where you would make that total cost of ownership argument. But you're also going to want to include the why of what risk is this mitigating. And so that risk may be something like, hey, if we keep using our current process, we're going to keep spending X number of dollars on repairs, or we're going to keep being behind on our processing because this washer is always down, or whatever. Whatever the cost of doing nothing is, you want to be able to demonstrate that. And again, sometimes that's hard costs, sometimes that's risk mitigation, sometimes that's compliance. Maybe it's all three, but you need to be able to make those arguments. And again, the more real data you can use, the more effective your proposal is going to be. We talked on the previous slide about the difference between hard costs and soft costs. Most value analysis teams are going to be much more inclined by hard costs rather than soft costs. And so the more that you can put your hospital's data into the proposal, the better it's going to be. And again, thinking about regulatory and clinical alignment, and again, we're going to get into this here in just a little bit, but this is where being able to talk the language of your stakeholders, meaning your customers like the OR, and being able to get them on your side becomes so critically important. If you are doing something because you have to, because you don't have the right equipment, and that's making the OR's life harder, right? You need to be able to explain that and get the OR on your side, because that's going to be much more effective than just saying, I think we need it because trust me, it'll make things better. And again, knowing those standards, being able to quote those standards is also really important, because I hate to tell you this, but your opinion just doesn't carry a lot of weight. And I hate that because again, going back to my experience that I described at the beginning, I kind of to look at it from the perspective of, listen, you made me the expert, right? Like you invested me with the authority of being in charge of this department. And if I say we need something, shouldn't that be enough? Like, that makes sense to me. But the reality is, no, it's not enough. You need to have extra objective metrics in order to prove that you have to purchase, you should purchase something. And again, standards are very important for that. But peer-reviewed journal articles are also very important. Remember, standards tend to be a little bit behind everything else because it takes so long to formulate those standards. Peer-reviewed journal articles, on the other hand, are typically kind of the cutting edge of what's going on. And so if you can find peer-reviewed journal articles that demonstrate the effectiveness of what you're proposing, again, that's another kind of like piece that you can use to get that point across. And again, think about the impact it's going to have on your stakeholders. If it's something that's going to make the OR's life better or more efficient, and you can quantify that, man, they're going to be on board with that. And I promise you that hospital is going to be very inclined to purchase whatever it is that you're asking for. So let's talk about what an effective proposal looks like. And I'm going to draw your attention to an item that is a downloadable asset. This is something that we created called a Capital Purchasing Committee FAQ that answers for you a lot of the questions that a capital purchase or a value analysis team would have related to borescopes. And so this kind of helps equip you to have all of that information just readily available so you can fill out an effective proposal yourself. And so you want to quickly and concisely answer questions about what is the item being requested and why are you requesting it. And again, the key here is to be clear and concise. I remember I wrote a proposal, going back to another mistake I made in my early management career, where I really wanted to establish a career ladder for my technicians. And I really wanted to communicate that I knew what I was talking about. And so my proposal was like 12 pages long. And the whole purpose of that was thinking, like, I want them to understand that I know what I'm talking about. And I really thought this through, and I need them to understand. And guess what? That 12-page proposal went nowhere because no one reads a 12-page proposal in a hospital. The more concise you can get, the more effective you will be. So everything you need to try and trim it down to just the bare minimum of communicating that information. You also want to draw attention to changes in the industry or new studies. And again, that goes back to a lot of those, like the peer-reviewed journals that we were talking about, right? If there's things that are new on the market or new research that's being done, communicate that in order to kind of make that case. And then explain how it's going to improve the current situation. Again, the more real world data you can use to explain the current problem, the more it'll make this more effective. And connect the proposed items to potential improvements to the things that resonate with the administrators. And so this is going to ask you to kind of think empathetically, think about what their priorities are, and then think about how to align what you want with what their priorities are. And so again, their priorities tend to be things like patient safety and risk mitigation, but don't just say patient safety. Explain how this product affects patient safety or the lack of it negatively impacts patient safety. Think about how to advocate that it reduces the cost of your service or improves your efficiency, and how it will get you into alignment with standards and best practices. Now, the thing that you really have to understand is that they are going to push back. Like it may make sense that, if you're coming up with this great idea that's going to improve so much stuff, that they should just like immediately clap their hands and be like, you did it, buddy. Like we got this. No, they are going to push back on you no matter what you say. And so you need to anticipate what those questions are and how they're going to push back. They're going to say things like, well, we just don't have the money to do that right now, or why should I say yes to you and not to somebody else? So be prepared to argue that the money that they spend on you is not going to be better spent somewhere else, and demonstrate those savings opportunities, which means that you need to be able to quantify the cost of the current situation. So don't just say something like, this will help us improve our repair rates. That may be true, but you need to tell them what the current repair rates are or the current repair costs. Or it's going to say, this is going to improve our productivity. Well, how much? Yeah, and so if it's like 1%, that statement is technically true. But that's not enough to justify spending a lot of money on a department remodel. So be able to explain how where your waste is now, quantify that with real world data, and explain how and how much you're anticipating this product, this whatever it is, to improve that number. And understand that when they ask for those competitive bids, again, if you're going to advocate spending more money, like not going with the lowest cost vendor, you need to be able to explain why. Because if you can't explain why, you might get the product, but it won't be the one that you actually wanted. It'll be the lowest cost one that they can find. And keep in mind that a lot of times, there's going to be some resistance to change, especially if it involves a change in practice. And again, this is when you really want to have everybody who's potentially affected by your proposal already on board. Like the OR should not be learning about a new product proposal from you in one of these value analysis committee meetings. That is an absolute easy way to have them clamp down and say, absolutely, we don't want to do this because we don't want to change our process. It works, yada, yada, yada. You should have already had that conversation with them, gotten their input and gotten their buy-in before you make that proposal, because they are naturally going to be resistant to any kind of change to their process. And so if this does require a process change, having a collaborative plan to implement that process change is going to be really critical to making sure that it's effective. And again, keep in mind, you may have competing priorities even within your own department. Like if you're going to propose 3 things that you really feel like you need to purchase, don't be surprised if they say pick one, and that's the one you get. And so even having kind of like a priority list within your own department of what is it that I really need first and foremost that's going to have the biggest impact is really important. And remember, a united front is the most effective strategy. This is the biggest problem, the biggest mistake that I see most sterile processing managers make, and I made it too, was the belief that if I'm going to propose something, it's up to me alone. And so I'm just going to try to bulldoze everything through myself. That is not an effective strategy within a hospital bureaucracy. You need to go out and try to find partners who will help you make that case and be on board with you. And the number one that you need on your team is infection prevention. Number two would be the OR. And if you can get infection prevention and the OR on your side, who will also come alongside you and say, yes, we think we need this, that is going to have a significantly higher chance of success than just you saying it by yourself. So again, remember, bring in the OR, bring in IP, bring in biomed. If you're talking about repair costs, for example, biomed typically owns that budget. So they're very interested in that type of thing. If what you're proposing affects outside departments, like maybe labor and delivery or wound care, and have that conversation with them on the front end, get their input and get their buy-in, because again, if just one person says we need this, it's very low chance of success. But if you've got 2, 3, 4, 5 different people saying we need this, then you have a much, much higher chance of success. So how do you become a more effective leader? Well, you got to build those clinical relationships, right? Like this is something that has to start long before you need to purchase something, like building those relationships with your IP, with your OR, with biomed, so that when they see you come through the door, they're not like, oh, what does this guy want now, right? Like build that relationship, get that stakeholder input, and you'll be much more likely to get their buy-in. Understand their pain points and their priorities and how what you're proposing might relate to those pain points and priorities, and then align your goals with their needs. In other words, stop, collaborate, and listen. And it hurts my heart that probably a good chunk of people have no idea what this is a reference to, but I am old and I love that song. So, but I think it's great advice, because we probably do need to stop, collaborate, and listen. So stay informed on standards and research, really be plugged into the industry, staying on top of peer-reviewed journals, going to events, staying connected on things like LinkedIn are all really important to help you understand when something is coming down the line, when a new product has been released that's going to help you be more effective at seeking things. And so seek mentorship from someone who has been successful at doing this. Like there are some managers out there who have done this a lot and are very, very good at it. And you might even have somebody within your own hospital, like the OR, for example. If you've got one of those long-term OR directors who's been doing it for a while, you can just sometimes go ask and be like, hey, I need to make a successful proposal. Can you tell me how you do it? And they most of the time, they're willing to share that information. Also think about professional growth, right? Learn business terminology. Don't freak out when you hear words like ROI or total cost of ownership. Like those are critical words that you need to be very familiar with. You also need to learn how to quantify waste. Don't just say we're wasting our time. Tell them how much. And the better you get at quantifying, putting real dollars or real numbers, real time, real productivity, the better you get at calculating those things, the stronger your argument's going to be. And I want to draw your attention to a second downloadable asset that we're making available. It's just a proposal checklist. And it's a lot of the stuff that we've talked about here, that anytime you're about to make a proposal, make sure you've done each of those things. And if you have, chances are you're going to do a pretty good job. All right, so let's talk final takeaways so that you're super successful and you look amazing while you're doing it. Uh, Understand how to navigate those VACs, and how to craft those proposals. These are critical skills for ensuring that your department is successful. Remember, no department is an island, so don't think that you're on this on your own, and don't try to go forward on your own. Partner with other people, IP, the OR, biomed, whoever. But build those relationships, and the more you build those relationships, the more you're able to present that united front, the more effective you're going to be. And don't just throw something together the night before and be like, oh, well, I don't know why it didn't work. Like, no, be prepared, quantify that waste, do your research. This should be something you're undertaking months in advance. And the more preparation you put into it, the more likely you are to be successful. And again, learn to speak that language of healthcare business. Learn those terms. Learn how to quantify those things. Those are the things that move that conversation forward. And again, if you are not involved in your VAC committee, you probably need to be involved in your VAC committee. So reach out, find out who oversees this thing, and find out how you can have a voice and why you need to have a voice. Communicate that to those committee owners. All right, well, that concludes this presentation from Healthmark Academy. Again, I just want to say thank you for paying attention, and I really hope that this information is helpful for you. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to communicate with us there at the information, the contact information you see there. And again, I just want to say thank you for everything that you do. And if there's anything we can do for you, just please feel free to ask. So thank you.